I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey, lurkers, welcome to this week's episode. I've been traveling, as I've been for the past year, back and forth to Virginia. Recently, I was just down there and I had like an idiot moment where somebody said, "So tell me about what kind of things you research, you do deep dives into, other than ghosts." And he sat there. I don't know if any of you, well, you should all have seen A Christmas Story with Ralphie and the BB gun where he's going to shoot his eye out. There's a scene where he's going to see Santa Claus and there's a kid in line with him and he's like, "I like Santa. I like the Wizard of Oz." Well, let me tell you, this person said, "What kind of things do you like to research?" And I'm over here like, "I like gardening." Um, and then thinking about it longer, pretty much everything I research has to do with this podcast. I don't have time to do deep dives into things that interest me outside of this podcast. So that probably should change. Anyway, that was just my little foray into Idiot Jamie moment. I imagine we should get this show on the road because I believe this is going to be a little bit longer than our typical episodes, just like the last episode we did 2 weeks ago. Imagine you're standing alone at the top of a lighthouse. The sun disappeared hours ago. The wind is pushing against the tower hard enough to make the walls groan. Below you, the Chesapeake Bay stretches into complete darkness. There's no city lights, there's no passing cars, and there's no sound except waves striking the foundation over and over and over again. Then you hear footsteps, heavy, deliberate, climbing the spiral staircase below you. You pause and listen. Someone should be coming through the door at any second, but no one does. The footsteps stop, and there's silence. You slowly make your way down the stairs, lantern in hand, expecting to find another keeper making his nightly rounds. Instead, the lighthouse is empty. For more than 200 years, stories like this have echoed from lighthouse to lighthouse along the Chesapeake Bay. Stories of phantom keepers who never abandon their posts, ghostly women who appear without warning before fading into the darkness, mysterious lights that guide sailors from towers that should no longer be shining, and voices carried across perfectly still water from places where no one could possibly be standing. Welcome to part 2 of our Haunted Chesapeake Lighthouses series. Last time, we traveled from the northern reaches of Maryland's Chesapeake Bay all the way south to Solomon's Lump Lighthouse, discovering that some of the bay's oldest beacons may still be occupied by those who once devoted their lives to keeping them lit. Tonight, our journey continues. We'll leave Maryland behind and cross into Virginia, where the bay widens, the storms grow fiercer, and history becomes even more unforgiving. We'll visit lonely towers surrounded by miles of open water, explore lighthouses where Civil War soldiers are still said to march after dark, and stand at the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, where America's oldest lighthouse keeps watch over one of the most dangerous coastlines in the country. So settle in, turn down the lights, and if you happen to hear footsteps outside your door tonight, you may want to wait a moment before answering. Tonight our journey reaches the southern end of Maryland, where one lighthouse stands above all the others. A place where history, tragedy, and the paranormal collide. A place many investigators have called the most haunted lighthouse in America. Tonight we begin at Point Lookout, As our journey continues south, the Chesapeake Bay begins to widen. The shoreline stretches farther apart, and the tides grow stronger. Eventually, the Potomac River meets the Chesapeake in one of the most historically significant places in America, Point Lookout. Even if there were no lighthouse here, this ground would still be considered sacred and haunted. If you've listened to episode 76, Ghosts of Point Lookout State Park, you'll already know why this location has earned an international reputation among paranormal investigators. But even though we've stopped here before and you've heard some of the stories, no discussion of haunted Chesapeake lighthouses would ever be complete without stopping here. Because if there is one lighthouse that deserves its own documentary, it's this one. Built in 1830, Point Lookout Lighthouse stands at the very southern tip of Maryland, quietly watching over the place where the Potomac River empties into the Chesapeake Bay. It's beautiful today, peaceful. Almost impossible to imagine the suffering that once unfolded here. During the Civil War, Point Lookout became home to one of the Union Army's largest prisoner of war camps. More than 50,000 Confederate soldiers passed through these grounds. Many never left. Disease spread rapidly, food was scarce, and exposure to brutal winters claimed countless lives. Most historians estimate that somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 Confederate prisoners died here. Some researchers believe the true number may even be higher. One of those men was my own third great-granduncle. History suddenly feels a little different when your own family becomes a part of it. Perhaps that's one reason Point Lookout has stayed with me for so many years, because here history doesn't feel finished. It feels present. Visitors routinely report seeing Confederate soldiers walking the shoreline before disappearing into the mist. Park employees have described shadow figures moving silently through the lighthouse after closing. Others tell of a soldier in gray standing inside the hallways. He never speaks, he just watches. Then he's gone. Perhaps the most famous spirit associated with the lighthouse is believed to be Ann Davis, the wife of the station's first keeper. Witnesses consistently describe a woman wearing a blue skirt and white blouse, standing quietly near the top of the staircase. She makes eye contact, holds it for only a moment, then slowly fades from sight. Others report seeing a completely different woman dressed entirely in white, wandering near the lighthouse grounds. Who she may have been remains unknown. Some believe she searched endlessly for a husband lost during the Civil War. Others think she may have been connected to one of the prison camp's countless tragedies. The Maryland Department of Natural Resources has acknowledged that multiple visitors have independently reported seeing the same mysterious woman over the years. Then came Hans Holzer. Long before ghost hunting became television entertainment, Holzer helped pioneer modern paranormal investigations. When he investigated Point Lookout, his team reportedly captured something extraordinary: electronic voice phenomena. 24 separate voices. Men, women, whispering, even singing. Among the alleged recordings, one chilling message stood out: "Fire if they get too close." Investigators wondered whether it echoed commands once shouted towards Confederate prisoners. Another voice quietly stated, "This is my home." Holzer believed that voice may have belonged to Ann Davis herself. Whether you believe EVP recordings are genuine or not, the stories don't stop there. Investigators repeatedly describe rooms becoming bitterly cold without explanation. One eyewitness recalled standing inside the lighthouse on a sweltering summer day. The thermometer still read nearly 100 degrees, yet the room around him suddenly felt freezing. Even stranger, the cold surrounded only him. Everyone else remained comfortable. Then there are the smells. Most people expect ghost stories to involve shadows. Point Lookout is different. Visitors frequently describe the sudden odor of decaying fish, stagnant water, or sulfur. The smell often appears in a single room before vanishing entirely only minutes later. According to Maryland DNR accounts, Holzer believed these odors somehow connected to the thousands who died in prison nearby. Curiously, after that theory became widely known, Reports of the odor seemed to decline. Perhaps the spirits had finally been acknowledged, or perhaps the witnesses simply expected something different. Heavy boots climbing stairs, doors opening by themselves, furniture shifting, voices in empty rooms. Former caretaker Gerald Sword experienced enough unexplained activity that he openly discussed hearing footsteps, voices, and mysterious lights while completely alone inside the lighthouse. Then came the photograph. During a séance held inside Point Lookout in the late 1970s, investigators took what they believed was an ordinary photo. Only after the film was developed did they notice something no one remembered seeing. Standing against the wall, partially transparent, was what appeared to be a Confederate soldier. The image became known simply as the Ghost of Point Lookout. Whether authentic or not, it remains one of the Chesapeake's most famous paranormal photographs. At Point Lookout, the lighthouse was built to guide ships safely home, but thousands of men who arrived here never would. Perhaps some are still waiting. Before we leave Maryland behind completely, we're going to make a brief detour. Instead of continuing south, we're going to turn west and follow the Potomac River. Technically, these next two lighthouses aren't located directly on the Chesapeake Bay, but their stories are too fascinating and too haunted to leave out. Our first stop is Piney Point Lighthouse. Completed in 1836, Piney Point is the oldest lighthouse standing on the Potomac River. Over the years, it earned an unusual nickname of the Lighthouse of the Presidents. James Madison visited here, so did James Monroe, Franklin Pierce, even Theodore Roosevelt would later spend time on these grounds. Unlike Point Lookout, Piney Point isn't remembered for war or mass tragedy. Its history is quieter and more peaceful, which somehow makes the reports of paranormal activity even more intriguing. Unlike many haunted lighthouses where sightings are limited to a single apparition, Piney Point's experiences involve something visitors actually feel. Guests have reported the sensation of someone brushing past them, a gentle touch on the shoulder, or the unmistakable feeling that another person has just walked behind them. Only no one's there. Others describe hearing quiet conversations drifting through empty rooms. Former museum director Michael Humphreys experienced something even stranger. While preparing to move paint supplies, he jokingly asked aloud if it was all right. To his surprise, a voice clearly answered, "Suit yourself." Thinking someone nearby had spoken, he searched the building, only to find it empty. Even more remarkable, the voice had been captured on his recorder. When Humphreys shared the recording, several longtime staff members admitted they had experienced similar unexplained voices over the years. Then there's the woman. Workers have repeatedly described seeing a woman dressed in what appeared to be 1920s era clothing strolling the lighthouse grounds with a cigarette in her hand. She appears perfectly ordinary until someone approaches. Then she simply disappears. Visitors have also reported seeing a woman standing quietly in the lighthouse windows. Some believe she may have belonged to one of the early keeper families. Others think she's simply another chapter in the long history of those who once called this lonely place home. Footsteps continue to be reported upstairs, and doors quietly close by themselves. Lantern-like lights appear where no light should exist. Shadow figures slip through doorways before vanishing. Nothing here feels violent, and nothing feels threatening. Instead, Piney Point carries the quiet feeling that someone just still lives there, watching, waiting, and remembering. Continuing farther upriver, we arrive at one of the Potomac's most strategically important locations. Long before modern navigation, ships approaching the nation's capital had to pass beneath the guns of Fort Washington. Standing nearby since 1857 is the Fort Washington Lighthouse, guiding vessels safely through one of the busiest stretches of the river. Unlike many of the isolated offshore towers we visited, this lighthouse has always shared its home with soldiers, caretakers, and military families. Its ghost stories reflect that history. Several years ago, a psychic medium visited Fort Washington, hoping to determine whether the rumors held any truth. According to her account, she sensed two spirits almost immediately after arriving. One was an older man, and the other was a woman named Ophelia. At first glance, it sounded like little more than another ghost story, until historians began comparing the names with records from the fort. They discovered Ordnance Sergeant Joseph Cameron, who served as Fort Washington's caretaker for nearly 37 years during the 19th century. Living alongside him was his wife. Her name was Ophelia. Whether one believes psychic impressions or not, the historical match is difficult to ignore. Visitors have continued reporting unexplained activity around both the lighthouse and the fort itself. Some describe hearing footsteps behind them. Others feel watched while climbing the tower. The atmosphere changes noticeably after sunset. Perhaps that's not surprising. For generations, soldiers stood guard here and caretakers tended both the fort and the lighthouse. Duty became routine. And if there's one lesson we've learned throughout our journey so far, it's that sometimes duty doesn't end simply because life does. Leaving the Potomac behind, we finally cross into Virginia. Here, the Chesapeake begins to transform. The bay grows dramatically wider. The tides become stronger. The Atlantic storms arrive with little warning. These waters have claimed countless ships. They've witnessed naval battles, hurricanes, piracy, Civil War blockades, and centuries of maritime disasters. If Maryland's lighthouse legends are rooted in loneliness, Virginia's are born from danger. And nowhere is that more evident than our next stop, the Smith Point Lighthouse. Standing nearly 3 miles offshore near Reedville, Virginia, Smith Point Lighthouse marks one of the most hazardous stretches of the Chesapeake. Completed in 1897, the Cason Lighthouse has endured thick fog, violent storms, shifting shoals, and generations of maritime traffic entering and leaving the Potomac River. On calm days, it appears almost peaceful. But ask local watermen about Smith Point, and the stories begin almost immediately. One of the oldest legends involves lights appearing inside the lighthouse long after it was automated. Boaters approaching after dark have described seeing the lantern room glowing as though someone had returned to tend the light. Naturally, curiosity gets the better of them. They steer closer. The light remains visible as they begin to approach, and then suddenly, it disappears. Others speak of hearing an old bell ringing through dense fog, despite no functioning bell remaining at the station. Voices have also been reported drifting across perfectly still water. These voices aren't shouting. There are no cries for help, just quiet conversations carried on the wind with no boats anywhere nearby. Perhaps the most unsettling reports involve a solitary figure standing on the gallery surrounding the lantern room. Witnesses describe someone calmly watching the bay. There's no movement or acknowledgement, just silent observation. When viewed through binoculars, the figure's gone. Some locals simply smile when asked about these stories. The keeper's still on watch, they say. And after hearing so many remarkably similar accounts throughout the Chesapeake, it's becoming harder to dismiss that explanation entirely. As we continue south, the Chesapeake opens into broad expanses of water where storms can build with astonishing speed. Here, nearly 4 miles from shore, stands Wolf Trap Lighthouse. This is my favorite lighthouse because you can see it from the haunted beach at Old House Woods. You can see it from several beaches in Matthews County, and I've taken many photos of it. I am familiar with its history. I was surprised to find that it was haunted, but it just adds one more reason why it's my favorite. So even the name of the Wolf Trap Lighthouse sounds ominous. It was completed in 1870. The original screw pile lighthouse stood isolated in the middle of the bay. There were no neighboring houses, no nearby docks, just endless water in every direction. Life for the keepers could be brutally lonely. Winter storms trapped them for days, and dense fog erased the horizon. Ice surrounded the lighthouse so completely that rescue boats sometimes couldn't reach it for weeks. It was exactly the sort of place where every strange sound demanded an explanation. And perhaps no Chesapeake lighthouse has a ghost story better documented than Wolf Trap. On December 8, 1882, Assistant Keeper A.F. Hudgens resigned from his position. Not because of illness or poor working conditions. According to newspaper reports, he resigned because of a ghost. The story quickly spread through Virginia newspapers before being picked up by the Baltimore Sun. Hudgens claimed unexplained disturbances inside the lighthouse had become so unsettling that he simply refused to remain there. Naturally, many people dismissed his story, but when local residents and several prominent citizens volunteered to spend the night investigating, they reportedly experienced the strange activity themselves. Unfortunately, the newspaper accounts never fully explained what they witnessed. Instead, reporters described the mysterious presence as almost playful. I do have two different articles. So, Hudgens resigned on December 8th. This article is from the Norfolk Landmark on December 10th, 1882. A Chesapeake Bay Ghost. A.F. Hudgens, assistant keeper at Wolf Trap Light, Chesapeake Bay, has resigned. Mr. Hudgens wrote to Captain Evans, lighthouse inspector, several weeks ago that his family, living on shore opposite the lighthouse, had been disturbed by mysterious noises. The inspector granted him leave of absence, a substitute being provided to investigate the matter, but the ghost was so unruly that the keeper had to resign. Mr. Hudgens declared that knocks and other noises were heard all over the house, and a young lady lying in bed received a severe slap in the face, and on a light being produced, it was found the blow had left the print of a ghostly hand on the lady's cheek. Matthews County is aroused over the matter, and watch parties have nightly tried to discover the cause of the visitations, but have failed. We sympathize with the frightened victims in this case, but have an idea that when the hand leaves a print, there must be a solidity about it that would exclude it from ghostly realms, while solid shot might send it there. And the second article is from the Alexandria Gazette from December 21st, 1882. In reference to the recent resignation of Mr. Hudgens, assistant keeper of the Wolf Trap Lighthouse in Chesapeake Bay, who gave up his position on account of ghostly visitations, it is reported that those unpleasant spiritual disturbances still continue. A number of prominent citizens in the neighborhood have recently undertaken to investigate the ghost, but without being able to prove that he is fraudulent. He is evidently a merry ghost, as he whistles when called on, and when requested to dance gives a regular double shuffle or Virginia hoedown in the very room occupied by his would-be investigators. He declines, however, to be interviewed more closely. So there's just enough to convince more than one person that something unseen occupied the station. To this day, there's never been an explanation. As remarkable as that story may be, Wolf Trap's most unbelievable chapter was still ahead. During the devastating winter of 1893, enormous sheets of Chesapeake ice surrounded the lighthouse. Assistant keeper John William Thomas later recalled watching the pressure build day after day. He became convinced the lighthouse wouldn't survive. Praying for rescue, Thomas watched as a steamer slowly forced its way through the frozen bay. He and the other keeper escaped only hours before disaster struck. The crushing ice ripped the lighthouse completely free from its foundation. Days later, watermen made an astonishing discovery. The entire lighthouse, still mostly intact, was drifting silently across the Chesapeake. Imagine seeing that through the morning fog. An empty lighthouse, floating, as though it had decided to leave on its own. A replacement caisson lighthouse eventually took its place, but many believe something from the original tower never left. Perhaps the ghost simply found a new home. As I said, this is my favorite lighthouse, and I've spent tons of time looking at it from the Haunted Beach at Old House Woods, which, for the shameless plug, is episode 2. If you haven't listened to it, there are a bunch of EVPs and personal stories about things that have happened at Old House Woods. Wolf Trap Lighthouse and Hooper Island Light that we talked about in part 1 were both purchased by the same person in 2022 and are both in the process of being restored. If you're interested in following the restoration progress of both the Wolf Trap Light and the Hooper Island Light, you can find information on the website www.thelighthouseCenters.org. I will include that link in the show notes. Our journey now brings us to one of Virginia's oldest surviving lights. Standing at the mouth of Mobjack Bay is New Point Comfort Lighthouse. first illuminated in 1805. For more than 2 centuries, it has marked dangerous shoals for ships entering the Chesapeake. Surrounded by marshland and shallow water, New Point Comfort possesses an eerie beauty, especially after sunset. Fog rolls across the marsh. The cries of shorebirds fade into silence. Then, if local legends are to be believed, another lantern begins moving through the darkness. Residents have reported seeing a lone light drifting across the marsh for generations. At first, it appears to be someone carrying a lantern, yet no matter how closely it's followed, the figure is never found. Another enduring legend tells of a lighthouse keeper who drowned while attempting to rescue sailors during a violent storm. Unable to save himself, he supposedly returned to continue saving others. Even today, some claim his lantern still appears on foggy nights, guiding ships safely toward shore before quietly disappearing. Voices have also been heard drifting across the marsh, knocking echoes from the old tower, and several witnesses describe feeling as though they're being watched while standing near the lighthouse. Whether it's folklore or something more, New Point Comfort reminds us that not every hero receives recognition. Some simply keep showing the way. New Point Comfort is my second favorite lighthouse. There's actually an observation deck. You can walk out on the observation deck and see the lighthouse from there in the distance. There's no way to get up close to the lighthouse by foot. You have to take a boat. It used to be a popular swimming area around the lighthouse. I never had the opportunity to check it out. It's on my bucket list of things that I would like to do. We'll see. Continuing towards Hampton Roads, we arrive at one of the busiest shipping corridors on the East Coast. Every day, massive cargo vessels pass within sight of Thimble Shoal Lighthouse as they enter or leave Norfolk Harbor. Yet despite the constant traffic, the lighthouse itself remains remarkably isolated. The original screw pile light was destroyed by fire in 1880. Its replacement suffered repeated collisions with passing ships before today's sturdy caisson lighthouse finally took its place. Perhaps surviving so much punishment has left something behind. Commercial pilots have reported seeing a lone figure standing on the gallery outside the lantern room. The silhouette never waves or reacts. It simply watches the ships pass. As vessels approach, the figure disappears. Others have noticed lights moving through the windows long after sunset. Several sailors report hearing footsteps or what sounds remarkably like an old fog bell, despite the station having been automated decades ago. Working mariners are not generally known for exaggerating. Most quietly tell their stories only after someone else brings up the subject. Perhaps that's why so many of the reports sound remarkably alike. Someone is still keeping watch. Just south of Thimble Shoal stands one of Virginia's oldest and most historically significant lighthouses. Old Point Comfort Lighthouse has guarded the entrance to Hampton Roads since 1802. It is the oldest operating lighthouse on the Chesapeake Bay. Not to be confused with New Point Comfort, Old Point Comfort Lighthouse is located inside historic Fort Monroe, and it has witnessed nearly every chapter of American history. The War of 1812, the Civil War, and World Wars I and II. Generations of soldiers have passed beneath its light. Perhaps some never truly left. Old Point Comfort possesses one of Virginia's richest paranormal reputations. The most famous apparition is known simply as the Lady in Gray. Witnesses describe a woman wandering quietly between the lighthouse and nearby fortifications. She appears completely solid until someone approaches. Then she simply vanishes, leaving no footprints or explanations. Some believe she was the wife of a lighthouse keeper. Others connect her to one of the countless tragedies associated with Fort Monroe. She's not alone. Visitors frequently report seeing Union soldiers walking the old fort walls. Others hear marching boots, distant voices, or commands shouted from empty parade grounds. Inside the lighthouse itself, employees have reported footsteps climbing the tower after closing. Before the beacon was electrified, several caretakers even claimed the lantern occasionally appeared illuminated, despite no one tending the light. Perhaps most intriguing are reports of a shadowy figure repeatedly checking the lantern room, as though another night's work has just begun. duty, once again, never truly ending. Only one stop remains before we reach the Atlantic. Standing in Hampton Roads is Newport News Middle Ground Lighthouse, Virginia's oldest caisson lighthouse. Although surrounded by modern bridges and commercial shipping traffic, the station still feels surprisingly isolated, especially after dark. Coast Guard crews have reported hearing someone running rapidly down the spiral staircase while every member of the crew stood together below. Maintenance workers describe whispering voices inside otherwise empty rooms. Tools left in one location somehow appear somewhere entirely different the following morning. Then there's the watcher. Several crews have reported seeing a dark figure standing inside the lantern room observing approaching boats. The moment anyone enters the lighthouse, the figure is gone. Perhaps strangest of all is that radio operators have occasionally received unexplained voices over working frequencies. No vessel identified itself. No transmission could be traced. Just voices appearing from nowhere before fading back into static. Leaving Hampton Roads behind, our journey reaches one of the most dramatic locations anywhere on the Chesapeake Bay. Ahead of us, the bay finally opens into the Atlantic Ocean. The water grows deeper, the currents become stronger, the weather changes with astonishing speed. For centuries, sailors approaching this point knew one thing: if you could safely round Cape Charles, you were almost home. But not everyone made it. The waters surrounding Cape Charles have claimed countless ships over the centuries. With dense fog, violent nor'easters, shifting shoals, hidden sandbars, and powerful tides colliding with Atlantic swells. It's easy to understand why this became one of the most important lighthouse stations on the East Coast. The present Cape Charles Lighthouse, completed in 1895, stood watch from Smith Island for well over a century. Rising nearly 200 feet above the water, it became the tallest lighthouse in Virginia and remains one of the tallest ever built in the United States. Imagine climbing those stairs every evening, nearly 200 feet, carrying supplies, checking the lantern, knowing hundreds of lives depended upon a single light. Perhaps that's why so many believe someone still climbs them. For generations, watermen have reported seeing a solitary keeper standing on the gallery surrounding the lantern room. He appears motionless, watching the horizon, watching the ships, watching the weather. The moment binoculars focus on him, he disappears. Others have reported seeing the lighthouse brilliantly illuminated years after portions of the station should have been dark. The mysterious light remains visible for only a few moments. As boats change course toward the tower, it simply vanishes. Fishermen working these waters tell another story. On perfectly calm nights, conversations drift across the bay. The conversations aren't shouted, and they aren't cries for help. They're just simply quiet voices. It's as though crews aboard invisible ships continue speaking to one another somewhere inside the darkness. Many locals believe those voices belong to sailors who never survived the crossing. Still making the journey, still searching for safe harbor. Whether that's true, only the Chesapeake knows. Our final destination stands where every Chesapeake journey eventually ends: Cape Henry. This narrow stretch of coastline marks the place where the Chesapeake Bay meets the Atlantic Ocean. Long before modern navigation, long before radar, long before GPS, this was one of the most important landmarks on the eastern seaboard. And appropriately, it became home to America's first federally authorized lighthouse. There are actually 2 towers there. The original Cape Henry Lighthouse was completed in 1792. Only a short distance away stands its younger replacement, built after concerns developed about the stability of the original structure. Together, they've welcomed generations of sailors home. They've witnessed wars, shipwrecks, hurricanes, the departure of soldiers, and countless sunrises over the Atlantic. If walls could talk, these towers would never stop. The old Cape Henry Lighthouse has accumulated ghost stories for more than a century. Visitors regularly report hearing footsteps climbing the spiral staircase behind them. The instinct is almost automatic. You stop and step aside, expecting someone to pass, but no one ever does. Others describe sudden cold drafts despite warm summer afternoons. Several witnesses report the unmistakable feeling of being watched while climbing toward the lantern room. They don't feel threatened, they just feel like being observed. Silhouettes have been seen standing on landings before melting into the shadows. Soft voices drift through the stone tower despite no one else being inside. Lights have been reported moving around the lantern room after closing. One of the most enduring legends centers on a former lighthouse keeper. According to local folklore, he still patrols the tower each evening, checking the lantern, walking the stairs, and making one final inspection before disappearing into the stone itself. But he isn't the only spirit said to remain. For decades, visitors have described encountering a woman dressed in colonial-era clothing. She usually appears near the middle landing. Sometimes she's looking towards the windows, and sometimes she seems almost lost in thought. Witnesses who attempt to speak with her agree on one detail. Before a single word can be exchanged, she fades away. No historical records definitively identify her. Some believe she was the wife of an early keeper. Others think she waited for a husband who never returned from a rescue attempt during a storm. Like so many lighthouse legends, her true story may already be lost to time. Yet the sightings continue. Storms seem to bring the greatest activity, perhaps because storms were when these towers mattered most, when frightened sailors searched desperately for one familiar light. When keepers climbed endless flights of stairs knowing failure was not an option. Maybe those responsibilities became so much a part of them, they simply never stopped. Over the course of these 2 episodes, we've traveled the entire length of the Chesapeake Bay. From the rocky bluffs of Turkey Point to the lonely marshes of Virginia to the place where the bay finally meets the Atlantic Ocean. Along the way, we've encountered phantom keepers, ghostly women, disembodied footsteps, mysterious lanterns, unexplained voices, and stories passed quietly from one generation of watermen to the next. Skeptics might say every one of these stories has a perfectly reasonable explanation. Old buildings settle. Fog bends light. Water carries sound in strange ways. Loneliness plays tricks on the mind. And perhaps they're right, but there's something interesting about the Chesapeake. The stories rarely speak of evil. Instead, they speak of duty, of men and women who devoted their lives to protecting complete strangers, night after night, storm after storm, year after year. Perhaps that's why so many legends describe keepers still making their rounds, checking the lantern, walking the gallery, watching the horizon. Not because they're trapped, but because protecting sailors simply became part of who they were. Maybe some promises are too important to break. Well, that brings us to the end of our haunted journey along the Chesapeake Bay. I hope you've enjoyed exploring these remarkable lighthouses as much as I've enjoyed researching and sharing their stories. Whether you believe these tales are rooted in restless spirits, generations of folklore, or simply the power of history to leave its mark on a place, one thing is certain. These lonely sentinels continue to capture our imagination long after many of their lights have gone dark. If you've ever visited one of these lighthouses or had a paranormal experience at one we talked about tonight, I would love to hear your story. You can find Lurk on Facebook and other social media platforms, or send me a message through the show's website. If you enjoyed this 2-part journey, please take a moment to follow the podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share the show with someone who loves history, folklore, or a good ghost story. Your support helps Lurk continue uncovering the forgotten mysteries hiding in plain sight. Until next time, keep looking over your shoulder, keep questioning the stories you've always been told, and if you ever find yourself alone near an old lighthouse, listening to footsteps climbing the stairs behind you, you might want to let the keeper finish making one last round. And as always, keep lurking.